Hi, I'm Mike Morris. I'm the superintendent of the Amherst and Pelham Public Schools. And thank you so much for joining this town hall this afternoon. We really appreciate you spending time with us. We know it's a beautiful day outside. But what we'd like to do today is share a summary of a very long document that was emailed out last week. We submitted, based on a school committee vote, a document that was over 100 pages describing our plans for fall. And we want to be able to share about 10 slides or so, so that people don't have to get lost in all those pages about academically, our facilities, our health and safety approach, transportation, all those types of things. We're planning, it's 4:01 right now. We're aiming to finish our presentation by 4:30 at the latest and have at least half an hour for question and answer afterwards. A couple other quick notes. If you are looking for live translation in Spanish, Korean, Portuguese, or some other languages that are listed on the chat, there's a website listed on that chat, and both you can access translation on there, as well as ask questions in whatever language you're most comfortable and it'll be translated back, and we'll be able to access them on this. If you are watching via this YouTube channel, again, the lower right-hand corner has question and answers. We're going to go through our presentation and then get to the question and answers later. But we're just appreciative of our community being so engaged in this question. We know we've sent lots of surveys, we've sent lots of information, and we wanted to try to consolidate where we are on August 17th. So with that, I'll go around the room and people can introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, Faye.
Good afternoon. I'm Faye Brady, and I'm the Director of Student Services for the DESE. Thanks for joining.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lee Whiting-Jones. I'm the principal at Pelham Elementary School.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Hall. I'm the chair of the Pelham School Committee.
Hello, my name is Katie Richardson. I'm the coordinator of ELL and dual language programs.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jill Consolino. I'm the nurse manager for the school district.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Derek Shea, and I'm the principal at Crocker Farm School. Welcome.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Diane Chamberlain, the principal at Fort River School.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nikki Affey, the principal of Wildwood School.
Good afternoon. I'm Joanne Smith. I'm a special ed administrator, and I work primarily with pre-K through 8.
Thanks, everyone. And so we have a large group, and some of that's so that we can present, and some of that is really about answering questions that may be specific to a school or an area after the presentation. So I'm going to tell the group, I'm going to try something a little new with how I'm sharing the screen. Hopefully this works well. And there we go. I'm going to make it hopefully a little larger for everyone. There we go. And so again, this is a brief slide deck. It's also on our website, our fall 2020 website. So if anyone's interested, they can view it there as well. And it's a summary of where we are today and what our plans are moving forward. Okay, so just a couple quick facts. The majority of our students and staff at the elementary level will begin the year remotely. Our in-person learning will be introduced on a phasing plan I'll get into in a little bit. And a set of public health metrics, which I'll share in a couple moments, will guide the opening of school as well as the movement between phases. So while one of the challenging things in this time is we are making plans, but our most important thing is following the public health metrics and making sure that we are able to implement our plans. And another important point is that all families have the choice of full remote learning or in-person hybrid learning for their children. If you are a parent of a child in kindergarten or first grade, a preschooler with special needs, or you have a child in one of the intensive special needs programs or special needs programs at the elementary level, you should have received a survey last week and a reminder today that is asking for that choice for students who are going to be, or families of children who are going to be in later phases. That survey will be coming soon. And this is the phase reopening plan. So the groups I just mentioned, as well as students who do not have a permanent residence, there are priority groups, and we're looking for them to start on, actually all students would start on September 16th. And September 16th, students either would start in person or in a virtual environment. And you can see the metrics we use are very conservative metrics. They're more stringent than the Center for Disease Control and the World Health Organization. Other states like New York and other states around the country recommended, but the Harvard Global Health Institute recommended them. And with all of our safety measures, we are trying to take the most conservative approach possible. For students in grades 2 at Pelham, actually they are included in that first group of students who would be attending based on some unique characteristics of that school. In October, we'd be looking at students in grades 2 and 3 entering. And in November, that's after Indigenous Peoples Day, so thinking about roughly a month after the first group starts. And after Veterans Day in mid-November, we'd be looking for grades 4 to 6 to start. And the metrics for those are very similar. It's just also we included a metric to make sure that we're not seeing a rapid increase in either % positive of COVID tests or in terms of the number of COVID tests, number of people with COVID in our communities. And so that's the phased reopening plan. I think so many things we'll have answers for, and other ones we're still working on. But I think we wanted to show a chart of when students would return and also the metrics that they would return by. If we're not meeting those metrics, we would slow down our pace. We could even go back a phase, depending how that goes. Right now, our metrics locally in Hampshire and Franklin County are well below those, the limits that are set, but we don't know what the future will hold. We have a different school calendar this year, so the state has agreed that there'll be 170 school days instead of 180 school days. So the first 10 days are for professional development for our staff, and that's why we're starting as late as September 16th. Another difference is we will not have snow days this year, that we will just flip to a virtual days. We extended, the school committee decided to extend the December break. It's a little hard to see, but you can kind of see these blue days. That was really the thinking, was that as people visit family members from out of state, we wanted to have a long period to support that. So last day of school would end up being, will be June 24th. Someone raised, well, what if there's an electrical outage and people can't access their Wi-Fi? I think like everything else that I said the other night is every time you peel an onion on this, you just keep on going deeper and deeper and deeper. But our plan now would be to end on June 24th. So it's just a summary of facilities, things we've done. Something not on this slide is at Fort River and Wildwood, we'd had significant work done. So what used to be known as quads are now halvesies. I don't know if we've come up with a better term. If Nick and Diane have one, they'll be able to share it. But essentially, they're 1,900 square foot rooms, each with their own ventilation system and venting system. The work is coming to its conclusion. The rooms look fantastic. I was at both schools and I was at Fort River another time last week. And that's something that we knew we had to do from a facilities perspective. We've also updated cleaning and disinfecting protocols. We're having a shortened school day. We'll talk about that when we talk about the schedule, but much of the thinking behind that is allow for enhanced cleaning and sanitizing both after students leave in the afternoon as well as back in the morning. All of our classrooms are outfitted with HEPA air purifiers with UV disinfecting light. There's one right next to me that's it's got a quiet hum, but that's what was recommended to us, and it really turns over the air much quicker than other solutions in terms of improving our HVAC system. Bathrooms, other high-touch services, door handles, clean multiple times. We've invested in other cleaning techniques and materials. We've school committee agreed that we would have 6-foot distancing in spaces between students and staff. That's the kind of outer edge of the state. They said no fewer than 3 feet, and our school committee felt from a safety perspective it was important to follow the CDC guidance on that. We have tents. They're going to be going up pretty soon at our schools to promote and allow for outdoor education. And HVAC, we've hired an HVAC company that's going to look at each of our rooms, and particularly at the phase 1 rooms, to make sure that we're getting recommendations as well as an accurate reading on ventilation. Just quickly, health and safety considerations. Ms. Consolino's here, and she'll be able to answer questions on these at the end. So all students are medically able to be expected to wear a mask that they will provide. The state has encouraged families to provide them. We have backup pairs that are available. We've purchased PPE. We did that a long time ago, so thanks to our team for ordering that well in advance. We've also have special face coverings. It's specifically for deaf and hard of hearing students and ELL students, but more and more we're thinking that even for primary grade elementary students, these are ones with clear panels over the face, and so being able to see an elementary teacher's mouth is really important for oral development. So we are trying to figure out the right PPE to fit the right age level and student characteristic group. Transportation, the buses will be much less full, roughly about half compared to last year. And that's one of our questions, is about whether families are able to provide transportation and are willing to. We know we've gotten a lot of feedback that that's important. and entry and exit will look different to be much more controlled than it was in the past. I'm going to turn to Nick Yaffe, who's going to start talking a little bit about the draft elementary school schedules. We'll start with the in-person schedule and then head over to the virtual schedule. So Nick, I think you're unmuted, so you're ready to go.
Yeah, so thank you, Mike. So this is the in-person schedule, and there's some similarities between the in-person and the virtual schedule based on what we see and what we believe in our heart of hearts, is that during this time, we're going to prioritize our what we would call student agency and engagement. That after being away from school for so long, in person, the most important thing will be for us to connect with each student, to build up strong student relationships, to focus on their social emotional well-being, and to go, create joy in the classroom. And so when we talk later about the draft of the virtual, that's the same. But in person, we want to, as well as virtual, I'm realizing now, the first time I've done both schedules at once, that there are these similarities. And so we'll be developing routines because we've all been away from each other. Routines that will help children feel safe in this reality of staying distant. But at the same time as we're in person, that we can still greet each other, we can still connect with each other, and we can still create our classroom community. And what we're going to be doing is, both of them are really, it's a framework. And we want our teachers and our staff to come together and enliven this framework. In other words, for figuring out ways to integrate the arts, to have students really engaged in what we would call leading their own learning. So if you look at this, we focused on the main areas of English language arts, math, and then what we call unit study or science and social studies. And we also put in social emotional learning as well, just as a placeholder to say this is something that we're going to include in every day of our school. So the one way to look at this is like the children come in, there's a sense of connection and greeting with our classroom teachers, and then at the end of the day, we're checking in with students and we're reconnecting with each other. So that's a brief overview of the in-person elementary schedule. And then if you look at the virtual schedule, like I said, there are some similarities there, except this is, as we've been saying, this is a new way of doing. We want to go deeper into our knowledge and our understanding of doing online learning. In other words, how can we keep kids engaged? How can we keep kids motivated? How can students share with each other? And I would say that in the virtual schedule, what we try to prioritize is the connection with students in small groups. So in other words, the asynchronous or the recorded lessons are there to deliver instruction. But then in the small groups, students and staff will connect with each other. And that's when the personal learning will take place. Mike, I don't know if there's anything more for me to say, or whether we should just allow the questions to guide this.
Let's look at your colleagues. I don't know if any of your colleagues has anything. You did a beautiful job, Nick, but if your colleagues has anything they'd like to add, then they're certainly welcome. I see people just waiting for the comments afterwards, and we'll do it that way.
Yeah, and I'll just take it, just to tie into that. I know it's in the comments, but clearly in the in-person learning, we're going to be prioritizing having students go outside on a regular basis and having movement breaks, but spending outside because we know that that's important in terms of the health factors as well. And we also believe it's good for kids. I think this will highlight that for all of us. It's like, wow, the children are doing better because they're going outside more often.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I see there was some comments in the chat about kindergarten, and for students who are in person, we are planning for again, it's an adjusted day. It's a shorter day, kindergarten, but for students who are attending virtually,
sorry.
That's okay. for students who are attending kindergarten virtually, we got very concerned about screen time and what that would look like. And so you will see that this draft virtual schedule for kindergarten, which was on the prior page, is a half-day schedule because we want to be realistic about 5-year-olds who have not been to elementary school before. And we feel like we can provide them with short lessons that get at the curriculum. We also know that all elementary students, but particularly kindergartens, really need small groups to be successful on Google Meets and synchronous calls. So by doing a half day, that halves the class size, which really will contribute to some important, I think, differences and enhancements of their experience. And so I think there's a question that I'm going to keep on going, but I think it's related to something Nick said, that the entire day is not asynchronous. There's multiple times throughout the day where you see small group literacy, small group independent math, small group science. Those are all synchronous blocks for the core subjects. So as Nick was saying, it starts with an asynchronous lesson, but then moves into synchronous learning. And I do want to note also, we are still in negotiations with our association. So these are draft schedules, and we hope to come to resolution and be more clear with that in the future. I'm going to keep going with the slides because I know there's questions that people have, so I want to get through these. I'm going to skip the secondary schedules because we did that this morning. And this is actually our last slide, so we're doing very well on time. Ms. Consolino, do you want to speak to at least a couple of these really important points about what families can do to prepare for school this fall?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Morris. So this this paper is posted on our website right now, and it's a quick 10 things to do this summer to get your kids ready for the school year. The first thing is to practice hand washing and hand hygiene. Every classroom that has a sink, we will be utilizing those sinks for hand hygiene and trying to reinforce with the kids a 20-second rule. Practice with your kids, singing a happy birthday or the ABCs. In any classrooms that don't have running water or sinks, we will have hand sanitizer available in those classrooms. We'll also have hand sanitizing stations scattered throughout every building. The second one, which is going to be really important for our younger students, is to have your kids practice putting on a mask and taking off a mask. And this is going to help with our younger kids to build mask tolerance. I know some of the principals are probably going to email out an article which helps describe this. And so it's to get your kids used to wearing a mask or a facial covering for a longer period of time during the school day. Social distancing, we're aiming for a 6 foot of distance between kids during the day. And this helps to keep kids, I know we can't keep every kid apart, but when it comes to a virus like COVID, when we look at close contacts and we have to identify somebody within that 6 foot distance, if we can keep kids apart, it helps to make that job a little bit easier. Number 4, we will be asking parents to screen students every day before sending them into school. We're going to be using an online platform so parents can submit a self-certification for their students, and staff will have to do this as well every day, and information will come out to you before the school year starts so that we can track anybody that's symptomatic for the virus, and then next steps from that. What else do we have on here? Immunizations are a big thing this year. The state is not backing down, relaxing the requirements. So just check with your providers to make sure that your kids are up to date on immunizations. Recommendations from the local pediatricians are, once the flu vaccine is available, to have your kids get it. And it's because the flu mirrors COVID very similar with a lot of the symptoms. So if you can get your kids vaccinated for the flu, hopefully that'll cut down on a lot of the visits that we're going to see in the health rooms. Number 6, extra masks. So we're going to ask every family to provide masks from home. We will have some on hand if the mask becomes unusable during the school day, and those will be a disposable mask. Like Dr. Morris said, we are looking potentially at an alternative mask for the younger students that would be a better fit for learning and in-person learning. So more information will come if we decide that we want to go that, if we're going to proceed with that information for you guys. And Water bottles have been purchased for every student in the district. The schools that do not have bottle fillers, the fountains will stay operational for filling, but the ones that have bottle fillers, those fountains will be turned off for drinking purposes. We want every student to use their own bottle so that we don't have to worry about cross-contamination and that kind of stuff. And the biggest thing is number 9 is your emergency contacts. If your student becomes symptomatic with any symptom of COVID-19, they will be sent to what we have is called a medical waiting room in every building, and we will be contacting you to pick them up for further evaluation. So it's critical that all the building nurses have accurate contacts for an emergency person to pick their student up, and we're going to ask for that to happen in a timely manner. And then number 10, there's websites that we have linked on our planning website, as well as our own district replanning website that we update on a regular basis with all of our planning documents. And if any questions come in, you can always reach me through Dr. Morris or one of your building principals as well. And I'm happy to answer to the best of my ability.
Great. Thank you. There was a question you mentioned in the other, the secondary workshop about the program around thermometers and supplying them for families.
Sorry about that. So I am actually looking into a program that provides free thermometers for families. I'm just waiting for information to come back from this company. It's a sponsored, I believe, by Lysol and another company that when families opt in, they will be provided with a free digital thermometer for home use. And so once I get this information, it'll be sent out to every family. And then once you opt in, you'll be provided with this thermometer for home use.
Great. Thank you. So let's see if I can stop the sharing. Ms. Hall, I know you were going to facilitate, but I see a couple questions right away that are about Chromebooks. So I think maybe I can address those ones. So we do have Chromebooks. First of all, if you have Chromebooks, hopefully you got an email from Jerry Champagne. We are collecting them for them to get updated. There was a big section outside the office today. I saw dozens of them. So we thank you because they do need to be updated like a lot of technological devices these days. If you don't update them, they will eventually stop working. We have ordered more Chromebooks to be able to provide for families. We know some families really rely on them. Other families chose not to accept one, but we're building our library of Chromebooks so that we can have one for one. In the past, in the Amherst schools, we had that at grades 3 to 6. We bought some last spring. We have other ones coming in 2.5 weeks so that we can support that. At the kindergarten level, we are looking at iPads. That's based on a lot of parent feedback, and also some of the programs are the touchscreen works very well for that program. So I think Ms. Hall, if you wouldn't mind, I know you were looking at the questions that were coming in. There was a lot of them, and if you could sort them and give them to us, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'll start to take them in order. I'll also group them. So if I skip over a question, don't worry. I'm trying to group them into obvious areas. So there are some questions on masks. One is this restorative justice approach and what happens if a student does not. And then just general, there are some questions about protocols for the younger grades and keeping their masks on. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I'll start with the restorative practice, and maybe Ms. Consolino can talk a bit about, or Ms. Chamberlain, I know, was talking about it earlier about strategies to support students on that. So when it says restorative justice, that doesn't mean we ignore it or we don't follow up when students aren't wearing masks. What we don't want to do is penalize students for needing a mask breaks more often or building up their stamina at the beginning of the school year. We're talking about 5- and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds primarily at the beginning of the school year who probably haven't worn masks as much as they're going to need to. And that's Ms. Consolino talked about, and I think Ms. Chamberlain can speak to, working with families to try to build up that mask tolerance. We know it's not going to be immediate. And what we want to do is a collaborative approach between families, students, and staff so that we can get there and we can build up that mask tolerance. That's not really about students who don't want to wear masks. It is a requirement to be in school. But what we know is with children, it's going to be a process, and we want to be supportive of that process as we move forward. Ms. Chamberlain, do you mind sharing a little bit of something you mentioned earlier? Sorry, I thought it was really an interesting one. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
Are you talking about training while at home? So I read an article recently in Edutopia, which is a fantastic educational resource if you're looking for quick articles that are evidence-based. But that talked about really trying to encourage families to do a quasi-training program at home to lead up to more and more tolerance of mask wearing, where you start for an hour at a time for a few weeks, and then, or for a few days, excuse me, and then the next couple of days try for an hour and then take a break and then another hour. So it's 2 hours total. So you can help condition your child to be more mask tolerant as well.
Thank you.
And then to piggyback on what everybody's saying, the requirement will be for kids to wear masks in school. And the thought process behind that is so that when you're wearing a mask, it's going to protect the people that are around you from exposure to the virus, and the ones that are around you wearing a mask protects you individually. What we're finding now is that a lot of carriers of the virus are actually asymptomatic, or they don't actually have symptoms. So by wearing a mask, it's going to help prevent the spread of this regardless if you have symptoms or not. And we know that younger kids, it's going to be difficult initially, and so they're going to hopefully build up that tolerance to it. I did see a question about the bus, and as part of the transportation, all students will be required to wear a mask when they're riding any of the school provided transportation.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second, which is to say our translators are requesting that I think we see so many questions and want to get to them, but that we really want to slow down our speech patterns for us presenters because they are translating fast and furiously, but we want to just make sure, and as I joked before, I'm not the best at that, but we will, if we're speaking slowly, please, for the audience, know that we're trying to make sure that the live translation can occur at that pace.
Can I jump back in there, Mike, just to think about the restorative justice approach? That part of restorative justice and restorative practices is teaching the child what the expectations are. So we'd want to make sure that as they come into school and as our teachers are reaching out to families to get them ready for school, that there's clear expectations about how and what to do and how to request a break and how we can help facilitate them feeling comfortable in the classroom with both using the mask, but getting their needs met when they need to as well. So that's a direct teaching.
Thank you. There are a bunch of questions about outdoor learning, specifically what is happening in the tents, how many students will be there at the same time, how much of phase 1 will occur in tents, and then just generally with windows open and in tents, what we're thinking of in terms of inclement weather. So can we talk about the outdoor learning element?
Yeah, I'll start with just the size, and then I'll let the principals jump in with some of the other thoughts. So in terms of the size, they're 30 foot by 30 foot, so 900 square feet. So it's slightly larger than the average classroom that we have across the district. Certainly larger than most of the rooms at Pelham, and definitely larger than the old quads by a considerable margin, about the same size as some of the rooms at Crocker Farm, although they don't have the cubbies which block the way. So full classes can fit in there safely and easily with 6 foot distancing, especially because they don't have furniture within them. And, I think there was a comment I saw too before that it's not that that's the only place outdoor learning can happen. It is the case that on drizzly days or days where the sun, may be a barrier, because it's so bright. We've had a number of those that offering shade really helps with that. But it's not the only opportunity for tents. And it is nice that we have a relatively small cohort of students starting at the beginning of the school year, because they will be able to be outside both with the weather, but also with the tents up more frequently. But I don't know if any of the principals or anyone else. Derek, Mr. Shea, excuse me.
Yeah, this is Derek Shea at Crocker Farm. Just a couple of quick things. I'll try and speak slowly. Sorry. So last week, I had a meeting. This is just a good example. I had a meeting with our Crocker Farm PGO members actually a couple of weeks ago, and then we met again this week. And one of the things we were talking about was this notion of finding a way to make sure that every one of our students who come to school have and real support to make this happen. Just have the right gear, I'll call it, to be able to go outside. Let's say even when it's raining a little bit, right? And so, we're very lucky here in this part of the country where we get a lot of sunshine and good days. And I was saying I come from a part of the world where it's raining a lot, and you sort of learn to go outside a little bit more. So we're going to work on, and I know the other schools are working on this too, is thinking about how do we make sure that we've got the proper gear in school so that you can go outside on a regular basis. Because to answer a couple of the questions, I do think we're going to be able to get more than one group out in the playground at a time, because all of us have got fairly, Pelham's a little bit different, but we've got fairly large properties. And I think there's a way for us to space out students, particularly in that first cohort that come in. So I anticipate we'll figure this out closer to the time, like when teachers get back August 31st, but I anticipate us being outside. Doesn't have to be pelting down with rain, but we will make the most of it, and we will certainly go outside a little bit more than we normally do.
Yeah, but something I put in the chat, just there was a question about mass breaks, and if you look a little closer at this schedule, I should have fast forwarded the slide when Mr. Yaffe was talking. Sorry about that, Nick. You can see that at the elementary schedule, there's mass breaks roughly every hour, kind of like the Finland model of, that there's some concrete instructional time, whether that's inside or outside, and then there's a break. And so we're trying to follow that model both educationally. We think it has a lot of merit, as well as in terms of getting mass breaks and getting kids outside, which is the safest place for the mass breaks to occur.
All right, great. So there are a number of questions about either children who will be in person for phase one and opportunities, especially for kindergartners, to meet a teacher in person or see the school. And then also for children who will be all remote, if there's any opportunities for initial in-person meetups outdoors and other ways. Essentially, I think what a lot of folks are asking is ways to establish connections before starting either in person or virtually.
Yeah, and I can start with that one. So the guidance we've received from public health folks is the only individuals allowed in the building are students and staff members. So that's really hard for us. We usually are doing the opposite, encouraging families, welcoming families, and we want families in our building. And this is a really different challenge that we have. So we are exploring ways that we might be able to have, for instance, kindergarten orientations, things like that, whereas people can be near the school and see the teacher in that way, because we know how valuable that experience is, but it's not necessarily something that we can scale. And so that's one of the challenges. I think the other challenge that we face is, again, we want to be outside and we can plan something, and then if it's torrential rain, even under a tent, there's some limitations to what's possible. But we are trying to think of active ways. In fact, the elementary principals took course, and one of the things was, even for the virtual students who won't be coming into school, what are ways that we can creatively make connections with families, even if it's not inside the school building. So we're looking at creative ways again to do that. We learned our lesson last year where we were in an emergency situation, and we had some success stories and some real challenges about making those connections. And we're in a much better place right now, whether it's in person or in virtual, to be connecting frequently with families, having those check-ins in the ways that work for families. We know that everyone's schedule is really different than it was a year ago, or we imagine it is for most people, and we want to be able to be respectful and responsive to that.
Okay. There's also a whole group of questions about the remote learning, some concerns about it's a lot of going on and off of meetings, that it could be a lot of screen time, a long virtual day for students, and what supports there are for caregivers who are overseeing that. And then also questions about with the virtual and in person is, will children who are learning virtually have the same teachers, and will there be consistency there?
Yeah, so I can start with some of that, I think. So we roughly think if the elementary schedule, it works out to roughly 2.5, 3 hours of being online. We felt like once we maxed out more than that, that was too much. Last year, we heard the feedback loud and clear that it wasn't enough. It wasn't sufficient. Last year, the focus was on resource delivery at the elementary level. So if you had an elementary child you saw every week, you got a distance learning plan, which is a set of activities and resources. That was the primary piece. And this year, the focus from the state and the expectation is direct instruction. So we've seen some districts do it different ways. What we experienced last year is long synchronous sessions online for elementary age students weren't successful. That students didn't have, after about half an hour, 40 minutes, the ability to stay attentive and to do work on a synchronous call was not very high. And so really what we're focused on is two things. One is having small groups on those synchronous calls. We found that to be much more effective than in general than the large group. And the second is to have some opportunity, some direct instruction asynchronously, as Nick talked about, some follow-up that's synchronous to support work, some independent work that may be on or off screen, and then a break. And so we are cognizant that it is something we're going to have to do a lot of work with caregivers and caregiver trainings as well as students to be able to manage those transitions. But the alternative, having long stretches of students online, from a learning perspective, we didn't feel like was effective when folks tried it last year for the best of intentions. Students weren't able to maintain themselves, elementary students, but even including secondary students. We can't simulate school just being online. It really is a different pedagogy. And I actually wanted to comment. I saw a question of, are virtual students being like synced in, or is there a camera? And in our experience and our judgment, that's not a very effective strategy, because you use significantly different pedagogical or instructional models that would be really different online than they would be in person. And from a teacher perspective, it's just very distracting to be following the in-person plus looking at a computer for what online students. So really what we're looking at is for Amherst Pelham to be collaborators on that. I know some districts have paid licenses for like a state system for curriculum. We haven't done that. We're going to work within our own staff to find out the best teachers to support our students. But I probably forgot a bunch. I'm trying to think of what else you asked, Ms. Hall, and if there's anyone else who'd like to share anything.
I will say I did just miss, there was one very specific one related to that. Were there resources to provide tutors or other support for families? I mean, I think it sounds like resourced by the school. So I think that's probably a no, but just didn't want to ignore the question.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to do in terms of that is really work in small groups with our classroom teachers, our special educators, our ELL teachers, which I'm going to get to Ms. Richardson in a second, because I meant to do that 20 minutes ago and I forgot, and our Title I and intervention teachers, so that people are able to maintain that small, close-knit group and make those strong relationships that really can't happen in a virtual environment with 20, even 15 students on a call. We find even administratively that when we have 6 or 7 people, we can have real discussions as administrators, as adults, and when we have our larger team together, which is 20 people, it ends up being very monotonous with one person talking for long stretches of time. But I forgot to come back to Dr. Brady, Ms. Smith, and Ms. Richardson, which was my script that I made a mistake about, just to do, so if we could pause from the question and answer for just a couple minutes. So I'll start with Ms. Richardson, who can talk a little bit about English language learners and English language learning education, and then Dr. Brady and Ms. Smith about special education. My apologies. So,
No
yeah.
So in general, the plan that we are operating under now that was approved has us inviting our beginner English learners back for in-person learning, should they choose to engage in that way. And that's really based on our guidance from the Department of Education that we should be offering for our students with more complex needs to have that opportunity. We know that language learning requires a lot of engagement, and certainly our team is really well prepared to meet the needs as best as we can in remote learning, but we know that the opportunity to learn all day with peers and interact and use language is a really different experience when we're able to be in school. So the hope is that for those students who do choose to return, we'll be able to provide their language instruction for a large part of their day in person with those teachers who are able to be there with them, and that they'll also connect with some staff to access the same content that other students would be accessing in terms of their math, their unit study that we call unit study for science and social studies, to make sure they access the same learning. And from there, we'll be working really closely across our English learner teachers with our content teachers to co-plan and find all the ways that we can help make the content engaging and accessible for all of our English learners based on whatever it is that they need at that time. So that's just a brief overview.
Thank you. And Dr. Brady or Ms. Smith?
So thank you. And I saw a couple of questions in the chat that were related to special education as well. So I'll try to touch on those. But in the models that were shared, the schedules by the principals, I think it's really important to know on a overview is that all the special education instruction and services that are on a student's IEP will be planned in the scope of whether it's the remote day or the hybrid day or whatever it may look like. That will all be planned within the context of the student's schedule, and communication and collaboration with families will be essential to so that everyone knows what that daily schedule looks like for their child. The other thing, and I think this goes along with what Ms. Richardson just said, was that in our phase 1 opening plan, we have planning underway for our students in our specialized programs to be entering for in-person instruction as of the middle of September. And Ms. Smith will be able to talk more about preschool if people would like to hear specifically about that. But the intention is for some of those students who have higher needs, from the very beginning, we will be having our teachers and our related service providers working in person with students for their IEP instruction and their goals, to be able to get their education that way. That being said, we know that some students will have classes that they attend that aren't in person, and we will be making arrangements so that they will be getting support while in school to access those classes remotely during that time. So I don't know if Ms. Smith wants to add anything about preschool, though.
Just briefly, I saw a question in the chat regarding the preschool schedule. And the preschool schedule relative to the in-person will be consistent with much of what preschool does around morning meetings, exploratory times, group lessons, story time, related services, and certainly outdoor activities. So I would say it's consistent with additional time built in. While preschoolers are not required to wear masks, students will be encouraged to, and what we recognize is it'll be a significant transition for them into the public school for the first time or back. So we're anticipating spending time just engaging with them around physical distancing and social circles and some of the good, rich preschool curriculum they already do. So relative to the schedule and the opportunity, I think we're well positioned for that.
Could I just add there, I saw a question while Ms. Smith was talking about IEP meetings, and although that doesn't apply to everybody who's watching right now, in a letter that was sent home, that we do at this point intend to have our IEP team meetings continue to be held virtually. I think the health and safety guidelines, and Ms. Consolino speaks to this frequently, is to have as few people in the buildings as possible. So IEP team meetings will be held virtually, yet they will be held within the expected timelines.
Okay, all right, thank you. There are a couple questions about report cards and how assessments will work.
Yeah, so this year, the expectation of the state is clear on a couple of things that were quite different than last year. One is that report cards assessments will be offered, and that feedback, which is a critical part of students' teaching and learning, needs to be part of the educational program. It's also clear whether students are in person or virtual, that they have to have 170 school days, and the time on learning requirements will be the same, so that instruction is at the core, no matter what method of education families choose for their children. So that is, it's a really good question. Last year, the state waived the time on learning requirements, and we weren't teaching new instruction at the elementary level for most of the spring, and that is markedly different in terms of the expectations we have for this fall and this school year.
A few more sort of protocol questions around this. One of them was on bathroom cleaning protocol and the frequency of that. And then also, if someone is needing to quarantine, would they then just switch over to virtual during a quarantine time?
Yep. So in terms of bathroom, they will be cleaned multiple times a day, and we're working with our facilities team. You may see a change in how many custodians are there during the school day versus after the school day or before the school day, because we know that that's a critical need for that to happen on multiple times throughout the day. And so that they are itemizing which rooms, particularly at phase 1, because that's where we are now, will be in use and which rooms they are. So that's on their regular routine And then the second part of your question, I'm sorry, I missed it, Ms. Hall.
That was on if folks need to quarantine either because of exposure or potential exposure, would they switch to virtual during that time?
Yeah, so there would be the opportunity, for at least the asynchronous lessons, if not more, to be accessed by students who are, out for any reason. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to have asynchronous lessons throughout, is that they're easily accessible for any student, whether they're in school or not in school. In general, if families start in an in-school environment and for whatever reason they feel like that's not working for their child, it's pretty easy to transition out to a virtual environment. Going the other way is more difficult, because it requires space and planning, and so that we're trying to think of very deliberate moments in time, which are generally around the quarters, which is kind of November, mid-November, mid-January, mid-March to the end of the year, so that we can manage that. We can make sure we have the space and staffing to support those transitions. So going one way is a little easier than going the other way because of the health and safety requirements. I do see one that maybe Ms. Smith or Dr. Brady would like to jump in on, which is what is going to happen with 504 IEP assessments that were started before school closed but weren't completed. I thought that's a good question.
Great. So I'm happy to jump in to answer that. So there were some assessments that were started and not finished, and there are other ones that haven't even been started yet. So our special ed admin assistant staff are already compiling the list of who those people are, and people will be in touch to be able to restart assessments that were kind of halted midway through and what that might look like, as well as to schedule evaluations that hadn't been started that should have been started in the spring. So expect to hear from people as school is opening about those plans.
Okay, great. A couple of school-specific questions. One was on the 5th and 6th grade at Crocker Farm and some outstanding questions about that. So can we just talk about the latest there?
Sure. Do you want me to go, Derek, or you like to go?
Well, maybe just for the sake of switching up a little bit, I'll say something first and then maybe just jump in. Is that I read in the chat somewhere, and I know Mike will make sure that we're supporting this, is that there is absolutely no plan for Crocker Farm students in 5 and 6 to attend school any less than their peers across the district. So hopefully I'm saying that properly in terms of everyone hearing it. And certainly as a principal, I would be advocating that grades 5 and 6 students at Crocker go to school the same amount of time as students at the other schools. And I think we're going to have to figure that out as we get a little bit closer down the line here. But the one thing I also want to say is, and I love every single one of these questions because it's really helping me to think about as we start the school year. We perhaps don't have the answer, and I'm just taking a risk by saying this, to every single question that's posted. And so I don't know the answer how we're going to do that, but we will make sure that our 5 and 6s across the district attend school the same amount of time.
That's absolutely true. And right now, one of the things that's a variable is how many students return. So, at our phase 1 level, we know that right now, that number, I think I shared on Thursday night, is about 72% of families are choosing an in-school return. One of the things I heard actually from principals this afternoon is we may send another survey out in the next week for students in grades, the intermediate and upper grades. That may not be binding, but it is something that we can start planning for, because that number is going to determine what's possible at the upper grade levels. And so, I think it's a question we're getting a lot. We're getting it from families, we're getting it from staff, and certainly I'm getting it from principals. So if you do have children in the middle or upper grades, be on the lookout in the next week. It's going to be a non-binding survey, but it's going to give us data that we can use to see what's feasible and what's not feasible, because I think it is a really critical question that we want to answer. But at this point, we don't have enough data to be able to do that.
Okay, great. I just have one more school specific, and then I'll move on to another cluster of questions. So at Pelham, the 2nd graders are going to be in the first phase. Does that change the grades in phases 2 and 3 at all, or will it just be the same, except that 2nd graders won't go in phase 2? Won't go in phase 2.
So Lee, I don't know if you want to jump in, but essentially, no, we're maintaining the same grade levels. Really, the 2nd grade at Pelham, the difference was that we have a number of folks like special educators and other teachers who work, because it's a smaller school, across that grade level band. We have some of those in Amherst, but at Pelham, it was really hard to, from a service delivery perspective, to imagine how we could do that, particularly as it relates to special education and students' IEPs and meeting their needs. Question is no.
Sure. Okay. There are a number of questions about teachers, teachers who don't return or those who do. Obviously, we've just begun negotiations with the teachers union, and so there's a number of things that can't really be discussed in this forum. But can you just talk a little bit about options for teachers and how this will impact them?
Sure. So, I think you've said most of it, that we are actively working in negotiations. So it's not something that I can talk about in public, because that's really the location for those conversations about that. We certainly want to work as best we can for staff members. And I think the school committee voted and passed a document that talked about staff members who do have health concerns and how to support them. But at this point, that's where we are. We're working hopefully towards a successful resolution with our association. And so I appreciate and empathize with the concerns of our families on that issue, but it's not something we can address in a town hall forum, because the forum for that is through negotiation with our bargaining units.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Brady, I know a lot of these questions really do relate to the mental health and social emotional learning element and what's missed in the remote environment. So could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So I think one of the things I wanted to share is last spring, the district organized some fall planning group, and Principal Yaffe, Principal Chamberlain, and myself facilitated a group of personnel for talking about social emotional learning planning for the fall. And I think one of the things that I just want people to know that in the planning of all these schedules, that's done within the context of the social emotional learning and the mental health needs of our students as a primary focus. So nobody plans to go right back into a math class without kind of talking about just and checking in where is everybody at, and making sure that our students are ready to engage in learning by supporting them in that process. So there will be a really intentional plan that is integrated into the school day for all of our students. And to keep in mind that we'll also have services for students who may be struggling. People ask a lot about what if students aren't complying with wearing masks. I think one of the things we will do is intentional learning. No one expects anybody to walk back in and say, gee, I know how to do this now. We're going to have to teach everybody. And people are going to learn at different times for that. And we're going to need different ways of being taught. So we're going to really structure that and provide all that for students. And I guess the final thing I just want to say is to really be aware as I read all these chats, the stress that everybody is feeling during a time that there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. So there's more questions than there are answers, and that sits with our children as well as all of the adults, and that is going to be a piece of our process. And if we can all work together as we're kind of embarking upon this journey of uncertainty, we have the best chance of really good outcomes for our kids. And I think that's the goal for all of us. So.
Yep, well said. And that's kind of a good segue into another question that's come up a few times, is sort of the stress around students in different phases and needing to drop off one child for in-person, but start virtual at home. And so I guess the question of, is there flexibility around that to make sure that families can get their various children where they need to be and get started?
Yeah, and so on the virtual schedule, we sent a draft, but there are drafts with multiple time periods of when instruction will happen for exactly that reason. So, that's a sample, but there are other samples that have gaps in different places. We do have a long gap that's between for lunch and a recess block in the middle, and some of that's because we know that there are food deliveries. We are having food in school, but we're going to maintain our food delivery system. And so we want to make sure that families aren't making the choice between going and getting food and working with their child on learning. So we are trying to be as flexible as we can be. I think the conflict with that is that families and staff and students at the middle school and high school level all desired more structure last year. They wanted to know when things were happening on a routine, regular basis, and they wanted more synchronous instruction. So we're trying to balance that as best we can, but there are some competing variables there. Can I say a couple quick ones, Ms. Hall? There was a good one on orientation for families, and that is something we're actively planning, and that's true for families who are starting the year virtually, as well as families whose children will be starting the year in person. We want to make sure that we're doing outreach to support families on both of those. There was a question a while back that I know some of our principals would like to jump in on about anti-racist work and cultural proficiency, and that's been something, while this show is more focused on some of the public health and safety pieces, it's not something that there hasn't been tremendous amount of work this summer on. I was wondering if Mr. Shea wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about Crocker Farm and some of the team and the work over there. I know there's been work at all the schools, but I've just got an email from some Crocker Farm folks with some of the work. And I think it is really critical because while we've been out of school, lots of things have happened in the world, and we want to make sure we're meeting students where they need to be as they return. So sorry to put you on the spot, Mr. Shea, but I think your team's done a fabulous job, and I wanted to give you an opportunity, and anyone else can jump in. Certainly, it's not the only school that's been working on this.
Yeah, I think just an example. Today is Monday, so perhaps, and I know some of our teachers are on this call. Perhaps Thursday or so of last week, I had the opportunity to join in a conversation, albeit remotely, with 15 teachers from our school who were meeting together, obviously during the summertime, to work to plan on professional staff training for the fall during our regular staff meeting time. The idea is planning curriculums that will seep into the classroom probably sometime as we get into the fall and the spring. I also know that there's been a fairly decent number, for example, at Crocker Farm of parents who are working on our social justice committee who've been working together in unity over the summer. Again, working on ideas to present books, materials, thinkings, plans to actually bring larger numbers of the Crocker Farm parent community together to again discuss anti-racist social justice matters in a very strong way. Jen Smith's been doing tremendous work in this. We're going to meet on Wednesday with Doreen Cunningham, who's our assistant superintendent, who's also leading much of this work. So I think there's a huge commitment, and we fully intend to stay focused on this work.
Is there anyone else who wants to? I mean, there's a lot of similarities at the other schools. I don't know if there's anything else anyone would like to add to Mr. Shea's comment.
Can I just add one piece? So we've been having lots of conversations this summer, and many of the educators in all of the schools attended a workshop on dismantling white supremacist culture in schools. So this additional layer is on a lot of our minds to really examine our schools as a system and look at our policies and our practices through the lens of really dismantling some of the longstanding practices that have contributed to marginalization or the oppression of students of color. So we're really putting forth a holistic effort as we move into the year to really be working at all levels of a school and thinking about all of the stakeholders that we serve.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. I don't know if Ms. Hall, I lost track a little bit of the questions. I don't know if there were other ones that you had queued up.
Sure. I mean, there were a few just about notifications if someone does get COVID, and then related questions about quarantining, and if one person has to quarantine, does a sibling in the school also have to quarantine? So just maybe that kind of data point.
So I think we'll turn to Ms. Consolino for those ones.
So when we're dealt with a situation such as COVID, I'm currently in the process of developing protocols based on guidance from the Department of Education on how to handle these specific situations. And the information will come from the Amherst Health Department if it's a resident of Amherst that's identified as a positive COVID person. And then we will make the determination of who needs to be notified as identified as a close contact. And those will be the individuals who will need to quarantine from school for a 14-day time frame. The current recommendation from Department of Ed is those identified as a contact should be tested after about 4 to 5 days for COVID, and then we'll handle next steps based on how the results come back from that test. If the test comes back positive, then they become a case, and then we deal with the isolation and time frame there. If we have a sibling, that sibling does not need to stay home. They are welcome to come back in school, because the best way I can describe it is you're exposed in layers to the virus, and a sibling would be a secondary layer to the actual virus itself. Where the people we identify as a close contact is a first layer exposure to the virus, which is the student and then their classmate. And then the sibling of the classmate is not directly exposed to the virus itself. So the sibling is welcome to be in school. Parents can choose to keep their siblings home, but that would be the choice of the parents. And then what was the last question? I forgot.
No, you got the whole thing. If someone is exposed, and then, yep, you got it all.
Okay. Yep. And then we will make the communications as we need to, and when we need to do that. And for the elementary levels, we will keep classes together as a cohort. And so those students will probably all be identified as a close contact to a positive case, and that'll be handled on a case-by-case basis.
A couple more quick ones. Should we do a few quick? Okay, the question that's come up a few times is about AM and PM kindergarten for remote and how that's selected. So is that family choice, or does someone get assigned?
So we'll ask for preferences and try to make sure we can balance that as best we can. But there will be an email sent out to families who make that choice for kindergarten so that they can make the choice. I also want to say it's worth noting that we've had some families inquire about not coming for kindergarten. While we think our kindergarten teachers do a fabulous job, it is not required, as opposed to grades 1 through 12 in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And certainly families have the option of choosing a different option. We've had some families who've inquired because they don't want their children necessarily to be, they're concerned about screens, or they had another option at the current daycare, which may extend up through kindergarten. And so we work collaboratively with those families. We want them in our district and graduating high school 13 years from now, and whatever choice they want to make for kindergarten, we want to support them as best we can.
Okay. And then I think maybe I'll do one last one, and then we can sort of talk about where folks should direct questions that didn't get answered. Just about attendance, and there's been some stuff in the press recently about, people being contacted pretty aggressively about their children not attending virtually. So can we talk about that?
Sure. So the Commonwealth has set expectations around attendance. We, like we do during the rest of the year, try to work collaboratively. I think Ms. Chamberlain did a really nice job talking about restorative justice before, and restorative practices. And our goal is to start to figure out what are some of the challenges that families are facing for their students, whether it's coming to school in person or coming to school online, and problem solving with that family. We are not interested in quickly calling, and I saw some horrific, I think it was the Boston Globe had an article, if I'm correct, in the last couple of days around that. And we also think that we want, if a student's homeschooled, that's different, but if a student's attending school in person or virtual, we want them attending school because our teachers do fabulous work that supports students' growth, and they can't do that if students aren't there. So our approach is really to try to work and problem solve with families, work collaboratively, and try to figure out if there is some concern or some barrier to attending school, again, in any way, shape, or form. How do we support families to do that? And Dr. Marta Guevara, who's runs the Family Center, principals do a great job, staff, counselors, but we do have an additional layer of support with Family Center, which Dr. Guevara runs, and her staff that can sometimes provide a little more wraparound resources, and not a little. They can provide wraparound resources, support, and make connections for families with community agencies to help support with that as well. So that is our approach, and that's how we approach things as it relates to attendance. We want our students in school. We want them learning. We want them making strong relationships with their peers, with their staff, with their teachers and paraeducators. And they need to be in school to do that, virtually or live. And if they're not, we, again, really want to stress that we want to problem solve with them and partner with them for the betterment of their children.
Okay, thank you. So there are obviously a number of questions we didn't get to. So in terms of especially phase 1 families who have not yet responded to the survey and have outstanding questions, or really for any families, Dr. Morris, can you just talk about who should be the best point of contact, where those questions should be directed?
Sure. So can you say that one more time? I'm sorry, I was...
Just about who, we have to wrap up now. Where should people direct questions that are outstanding after this?
Yeah, so I think if there are questions that are specific to, the phasing and there was some feedback, you can certainly always direct it to my address, which I think Ms. Figueroa will type in, which is morrism@arps.org. I think most people know how to get in touch with the principals, but I know there were also some ones about health and safety. You can send them to me. I'll send them over to Ms. Consolino so she can respond. On our website, on the health and safety part, there's I think 17 or 19 page document from the state of a bunch of different scenarios in terms of if a staff member suspected or is confirmed to have COVID, same with students. And there's a little bit of almost like a flow chart. And so we are following the state guidance, and certainly we can talk you through that, but that is probably the best resource if you want to read on your own. Otherwise, certainly send an email to me and I can send to Ms. Consolino. I think also the school committee at arps.org website, if it is broader policy questions, like I saw some that were focused on, well, at Pelham, should, maybe 4th grade should start earlier based on staffing. Certainly that can go to the principal. It can also go to the school committee as well. And I think this is one of the challenges of our current situation is that I'd love, and those of you who know me well, I think we collectively would love to be able to answer every single question about exactly what's going to happen 30 days from now. And the reality is we don't know what the public health data is. We don't know exactly the student return. We're getting pretty close, but we don't know all of that information. That deadline's tomorrow. So as we continue to get more information, we'll continue to update our website and to update the community as we get closer. And but I thank everyone for the questions. They're incredibly helpful for us to consider, and we'll answer as many as we can, and we'll continue to answer them as more information becomes available.
Okay.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Dr. Brady wanted me to mention that for students who are in phase 1 who are special needs, Dr. Brady would want those emails directly to her, or wouldn't mind, I should say. And it's bradyf@arps.org to email Dr. Brady, and she can share them with Ms. Smith as well.
Okay. All right. It is 7 minutes past 5. So I think we will end this, but again, the conversation is not over. So thanks to all staff and principals and to everyone who asked questions.